And welcome to the show, episode 2 of my as yet still unnamed show. I love the feedback that you guys gave me on the first one. We're going to be doing even more stories this week. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently. At the end, we're going to have some responses to a few of the Twitter comments that you guys gave me. And for whatever reason, this week on the Friday edition of the Young Turks, there were a lot of stories we were unable to get to. So this episode is going to be chock full of fun stuff. We've got a quick update we're going to get to on the continuing conflict over the burial of the Boston bomber. We've got a couple of updates on some gun-related stories. Michele Bachmann is still as crazy as ever. Amazing information coming out of a new Obamacare-related database. And then finally, Maxim's Hot 100 has come out. And I have a few things to say about their top 10 and the way that they run things. But we're going to be starting off with that first story about the Boston bomber. So, as you know, there's been a lot of conflict recently over where Tamerlans Burial should be buried. They'd been going to literally dozens of cemeteries, and nobody wanted to have his body there. Now, there are a couple of reasons they were worried about that. They felt like it might be some sort of shrine, I guess, for Islamic extremists to want to go there. I imagine that if you were part of some sort of Islamic extremist cell in America, you probably wouldn't want to telegraph your presence to the FBI by holding weekly vigils over the body of Tamerlan, especially because as of yet we still have no real evidence that he was connected in any substantive way to Islamic extremists abroad. But those concerns were there. But anyway, it turns out that now, after a couple of weeks, we've got him in the ground. He is going to be buried. It's going to be at the Al-Barzakh Cemetery, which is a small cemetery in Doswell, Virginia, which is just about 25 miles north of Richmond. So he will be moved down to Virginia, and he will be buried in this Muslim cemetery. Now, it's actually kind of interesting how this came about, and you might wonder, why is he going all the way down to Virginia? So there's a woman, Martha Mullen. Now, she is in fact Christian, but she says that her Christian faith told her she needed to do something. Let's go to her quote. She says, "Jesus says to love our enemies, so I was sitting in Starbucks and thought, maybe I'm the one person who needs to do something." I love that she got this deep philosophical thinking about her role in the burial of a terrorist while in Starbucks. I'm usually trying to make a little bit of progress on my zombie fantasy novel, which is still just about halfway through. But anyway, she decided to do that, so she contacted Imam Ammar Amoretti, which sounds actually like an Italian name, oddly enough. And so he was able to arrange for this burial, which will happen. So I guess the conflict is over? It's hard to tell, and here's why. In America, we have an obsession with the weirdest things. One of them apparently is bodies. And the idea is that these terrorists are bad people. They did horrible things. And I suppose I don't want to be unreasonable. I don't want the guy being buried in my front yard or something like that. But being in a cemetery somewhere, look, we put bodies somewhere. Do you want to cremate him, dump him into the ocean? Eventually his body gets circulated back into our drinking water or something like that? It's moronic. He's not going to kill anyone else. We don't have to worry about zombie terrorists anytime soon, but people are obsessed with bodies. It kind of reminds me about, there was the mosque near the World Trade Center, the site of where the World Trade Center was, and people were so worried about that. Now, they had no connection whatsoever to any sort of extremism or jihadists or anything, but people just feel like anything that has this negative connotation can't be within blocks of me. I don't want it sullying my community, but that's not how communities work, so I think that you can relax. Also, it's similar to, we've had this discussion about closing down Guantanamo, and the idea is that you then have to put these people somewhere. And we'd want to try them in New York, probably, because, I mean, if the crimes that they were eventually put in there for, some of them, took place in New York, that's the jurisdiction that they would have to be tried in. And people were saying, no, don't bring them to New York, as if they're just going to break out of police custody and start blowing up buildings. They've been on hunger strikes for it seems like years at this point. I don't think they're going to be blowing up anything. Cenk likes to talk about this, and I feel the same way. I think that this obsession with keeping the bodies away and keeping the terrorists off our shores when they're in police custody is a sign of immense weakness. I believe that if you want to project strength to the world and strength to our enemies, bring them here, show them that our criminal justice system, our prison system is strong enough to keep together or keep under guard a couple of terrorists who haven't had any exercise or real food in something like 8 years. And yeah, I think that this is just another continuing instance of the weird Islamophobia that just is blanketing our country for the last decade. Like that people in Virginia, I don't know if they're protesting yet. I imagine there will be some protests, even though this is a Muslim cemetery. They probably don't think of themselves as people who hate Muslims, but the idea that the body of a dead terrorist can't be somewhere in a cemetery that you're not even going to go into anyway would bother you. I think that's a problem, and I think that these people should move on and move past this obsession we have with bodies. That's probably the last we'll hear of Tamerlan unless news comes out of his interaction with some sort of Islamic jihadist group overseas. But for now, let's move on to a couple of the interesting gun-related stories that came up over the last week. Senator Kelly Ayotte has not had a good time of it ever since she decided to vote against the extremely popular background checks bill. Now, it wasn't popular in the Senate, you should take note. It did fail. But of course, the polls, as we've gone over on the last episode of this show, it's immensely popular among Democrats, Republicans, Independents. So she's had a bad time, and she needs some support. So an ad was run by a group called the American Future Fund that was aiming to do just that. Let's watch.
Those commercials from out-of-state groups attacking Kelly Ayotte are flat out wrong.
Those attack commercials are partisan and deliberately misleading.
I know they're distorting her record. When it comes to preventing gun violence, Kelly voted for what works, fixing background checks and strengthening mental health screenings.
Kelly Ayotte has worked closely with New Hampshire law enforcement to put violent criminals behind bars.
Kelly has the courage and independence to stand up and do what's right for New Hampshire.
She's helped make our community safer.
What most of us here in New Hampshire support are common sense gun reforms, and that's what Kelly voted for.
Now, it might seem at casual first glance there's nothing wrong with that group. You should take note, of course, that Kelly Ayotte's campaign did not run that. It was this American Future Fund, a conservative group that's trying to give her some support. Obviously, they agree with her on these gun control issues. But there is something hiding underneath the surface of that ad. It was one of those of the style that's become very popular lately because of Barack Obama's success in using average Americans to get a message across. You saw there a couple of real Americans, average New Hampshire moms and things like that, that support Kelly Ayotte's positions. Of course, when you look into it, they're not average Americans. They're extremely connected, long-term, loyal Republicans. You might not be surprised to find out that, but let's break down the connections a few times so you don't think that I'm exaggerating. First woman we're going to talk about that was in the ad was Jane Millerick. Now, she's billed as a New Hampshire mom. But she's actually had quite a history in politics, you might be surprised to find out. She was a Republican strategist who served as chairman of the New Hampshire Republican State Committee, a New Hampshire Republican delegate back in 2008, and was a member of New Hampshire Women for Mitt Coalition in 2012. How she moved past politics? No, she's actually serving right now as a professional political consultant. And sometimes part-time actor, I guess, in political campaign commercials. Judy Brown, another woman labeled in that video as a New Hampshire mom who you can trust. She served alongside Millerick, by the way, the last woman, in the Romney campaign, volunteered for Ayotte's campaign back in 2010, and just this year was named as the Nashua City Republican of the Year. So, she's not just an average American. She's not just an average Republican. She's Republican of the Year, at least in New Hampshire. There's another couple of individuals who are mentioned there. Some of them are labeled just as law enforcement officials. They've previously, by the way, those particular law enforcement officials have come out in support of Ayotte and are featured on her Facebook page. Now look, this is not something that just Kelly Ayotte's supporters do. Both Democrats and Republicans occasionally try to sneak in somebody to support them. I think McConnell had that recently. Oh, actually, Todd Akin did that. Some of the women for Akin. It was like people working on his campaign. It's laughable, and I like that the information came out about them because this isn't an issue that we often get to laugh about. But the interesting thing, the weird twist on reality here, is that the purpose of this video is to show what the average person in this country thinks about background checks. This is not the right way to measure that. We do actually have ways to measure that, and they're called public opinion polls, and as we've previously discussed on this show, they show that people are very much in support of the background checks. So this is ridiculous. It's laughable. It's actually kind of pathetic that they couldn't actually find a few regular Republican women to be in this ad. And what I want to talk about now is partially because of the trouble that senators like Kelly Ayotte have had since their vote and their lowering public approval ratings, which is seen as a direct result of that vote, is that there might actually be a future now for the background check. Senator Harry Reid is saying that we might have a few more votes on it. which is great. And I hope that it comes up, and I hope that it passes. It'll show the effect that average Americans actually have on politics, because they don't support what the politicians did in this case. But let's put this quickly in perspective, at the risk of belaboring this entire point. In the wake of Sandy Hook, we saw a possible silver lining in that despite this horrible tragedy and the lives lost, there might be some substantive legislation to do something, anything, whatever we can do to make tragedies like this less likely to happen in the future. And gradually, what we were going to do was chipped away and like forget the assault weapons ban and forget the bans on high-capacity magazines and forget all that. Maybe we can get the background checks. That failed. Now it's coming back, and we're supposed to be happy. As if that was like the grand goal that we've had this entire year, was to get background checks, to get a slight expansion of background checks, make them a little bit easier to check into in a couple of areas like the online sales and the person-to-person transfer of guns and things like that. But that's not what we were looking for here. And I think that when you look at it in perspective, when you look at what we originally wanted and what we're getting now after just the beating that these Republicans and some Democratic senators have gotten, I think that it's actually pretty weak. And I suppose that Kelly Ayotte's doing better off than she should be if the people actually had their way. But yeah, let's move from New Hampshire down to Missouri. More gun insanity going on around the country. A bill in Missouri has passed the House, and there's the possibility that the Democratic governor, Jay Nixon, might sign it. We don't yet know. We'll have to be watching for that in the next week. But it's called the Gun Nullification Bill. Now, why is that? It's because any nullification bill is basically, first of all, it's bad news and it's usually unconstitutional. But in this case, it means that they are going to make let me read the actual quote. The bill's nullification provision not only declares invalid all laws that infringe on the people's right to keep and bear arms as guaranteed by the Second Amendment, it also strikes down some existing federal gun laws. And so basically the idea is we're not going to allow the federal government to enforce gun control legislation on Missouri. When we get into some of the specific provisions here, you're going to see how extreme this bill actually is. So let's go over a couple of the other things that this bill does. It allows concealed weapons to be carried by designated school personnel in school buildings. So this is one of the NRA's wet dreams. It allows people with a firearms permit to openly carry weapons, even in areas where current laws in Missouri say they can't. It prevents people from publishing any identifying information on gun owners, so that's that gun registry that gun owners have been so terrified of. And it lowers the minimum age required to obtain a concealed weapons permit from 21 to 19. I don't know exactly what age it should be set at, but I love that, why not? We'll lower that too. So in a bunch of different areas, this not only says we're not going to have any new federal gun legislation applied to Missouri, but we're going to weaken any regulations that currently exist in Missouri. I understand that there is a debate to be had on where we should draw the line on gun control legislation. I would definitely expand upon what we have now. I would not outlaw all guns. I wouldn't create any sort of national gun registry or expect to strip people of their guns and collect them for the military. I don't think that the military or the government should be hoarding ammunition, nor do I think that that's what it actually is doing right now, despite some of the lunatic fantasies going on among crazed gun owners. But I love that they think that this is what they need to be doing in Missouri right now. Like, there are major problems in a lot of states around the country, not even just having to do with guns. I don't know how many shootings we've had in Missouri since Sandy Hook. I imagine there's been at least a few, since it seems to be coming up around the country every single day. But I love that this is the legislation they're working on. Kansas, by the way, passed a similar bill just recently, and we already believe, I think Eric Holder said something about that. Yeah, Eric Holder said that there might very well be a Department of Justice investigation into that. They might be taking it into court because these nullification laws, there's like a history of about 100 years of generally conservatives trying to pass these when the federal government infringes on their perceived rights. So it's probably unconstitutional. It might go to court. By the way, let's talk about some of the other stuff that Missouri has done recently. It's not just gun nullification bills. They recently voted to entirely defund the state driver's license bureau, citing gun confiscation worries. And both houses passed a bill to thwart a non-binding United Nations resolution on sustainable resource development that they think is going to lead to people living in hobbit homes and things like that. That's that Agenda 21. It's this completely non-binding UN resolution that maybe we should think about how we expend our resources, and we should think about sustainability and the future of mankind, and not just gobbling up every natural resource over the course of the next 15 or 16 years, and then just, whatever happens to our kids and grandkids happens, I guess. There are definitely some other things that have gone on in Missouri, but I love how crazy some of these state senates can be, and state houses, by the way. The state government is supposed to be sort of the laboratory of democracy. I guess that's what it's historically been called. But sometimes that laboratory produces some weird science indeed. So I don't think that this is going to end up passing, or if it does pass, it's not going to stand because it's clearly unconstitutional. But this is where we're at in this country right now. There can't be any rational discussion over gun control laws. I would personally say that, for instance, if a 30-round magazine was banned, or particular assault weapons were banned, you still have your right to bear arms, just not all arms. I think that is fair and rational, considering the situation with gun violence we have in this country, but I guess I'm not fit for the Missouri State Senate. So moving to other gun-related news, this one's going to be a little bit harder to contain than the gun nullification bill. You saw last week the Liberator, an entirely 3D printed gun, a pistol that Cody Wilson, the leader of Defense Distributed, designed. The blueprints were made available on his website. You saw a video of it being fired. Now, we should bear in mind that while the vast majority of it is made with this high quality plastic, you do need a firing pin, which apparently you can make out of a nail. And it's supposed to have a metal piece that allows metal detectors to detect it. But of course, that isn't essential, and we have no reason to believe that people who print out these guns will actually use that. Anyway, those plans, the blueprints, have now been scrubbed from the internet by the Department of Defense. There's a posting on the Defense Distributed website that says, "Until further notice, the United States government claims control of the information." So the U.S. Department of Defense Trade Control says that they need to look into this and find out if it's illegal in some fashion. We also have a quote, by the way, from Cody Wilson, the developer of these blueprints. He says that they asked that I take it down while they determine if they have the authority to control the info, being the blueprints. It's clearly a direct response to everything we did this week. 3D printing is clearly not the best way to make an effective weapon. There, he's talking to Fox News, and of course he has to sneak in that, oh yeah, don't worry about this. Like, it's so much easier to get guns legally. Which it very well might be, but if your only option is to do it illegally, this seems like a pretty good one, especially as the price of 3D printers goes down. So, the government took these plans off of the internet, despite the fact that 100,000 copies had already been downloaded from Defense Distributed just in that week. So, are we free and clear now of the 3D printed gun threat? Of course not. The Pirate Bay stepped in. They have taken these blueprints and made them a torrent that can be downloaded. It's already spread to other torrent sites as well. So despite the best efforts of the administration and of the Department of Defense to squash these 3D printed gun blueprints, they're now out there. We talked about this when the news first came out. Unless you take it down in the first quarter of a second, somebody's going to download it, they're going to upload it to a torrent site, and now it's out there. And look, this isn't the be-all, end-all of 3D gun blueprints. This one happens to work. You can fire one shot or whatever. Others will be made. Progress, it can't be stopped, really. Now, look, I know some people are going to say that I'm being hypocritical because I certainly do my fair share of torrent downloading. I believe that some things can be freely distributed and it really harms no one. If I download a movie that I would never otherwise pay for, I've told myself and convinced myself that I'm not really hurting anyone. You might disagree. But in this case, we're talking about guns. We're talking about somebody potentially buying one of these printers, printing up 100 of these guns, arming their insane militia, and then shooting law enforcement officials or going into a school and gunning down children. Like, that's a very real possibility. Now look, could they do it with guns that they make in their garage out of metal? Yes, possibly. Could they do it with guns that they buy legally? Yes, possibly. Both of those things would be easier to track for a number of different reasons than these 3D printed guns, which could conceivably just be melted down again after the crime was committed. Now, I'm saying that I don't like this. If they wanted to ban these in some way, I suppose they probably could. Zip guns have been banned and other sorts of homemade guns have been banned before. Do I think that will make a difference in the long run? No, I really don't. I find this story to be kind of depressing because I don't want this sort of technology to spread. Not the 3D printers. I love those. I love the idea of having a replicator in my home. But I don't want any kid to be able to download and produce his own gun, no matter how hard it is to assemble the damn thing, or if you have to make a firing pin out of a nail. I think that it's ridiculous. There's really, realistically, not much that we can do, but I think that we've entered a pretty scary period in history where people can conceivably make their own weapons out of just plastic that they have lying around. I don't know what we're going to do about this, but it's an interesting story. We're going to keep watch of it. I think that Cody Wilson, he has this obsession with liberty. He loves to talk about it, but I think that in the long run, he might very well be responsible, at least in some sense, for multiple deaths. Why don't we take a short break, because this next story coming up is going to take a little while. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the extreme variability in the cost of healthcare procedures in the same city. And thankfully, we have this information because of Obamacare. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll talk about that story. And we're back. We've got 5 more awesome stories for you, some serious stories. We're going to get to a little bit of lighter news later on in the show. But first, we're going to be starting off with something that's come about because of Obamacare, and I think that it's just awesome, so I want to detail this. We now have the results of a database put together as a part of Obamacare. The Obama administration and the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services have released this database, and it's showing us some really interesting information about healthcare costs around the country. So what's included in this database? The data released covers claims that were filed in the fiscal year 2011 and includes over 163,000 individual charges to patients recorded at more than 3,300 hospitals in 306 metropolitan areas. So basically, as one of the provisions under the Affordable Care Act, 100 different, the most common hospital procedures, we had an analysis of hospitals around the country and how much do these things charge, because we want to be able to compare from one hospital to another. Are people being ripped off at them? We didn't previously have this information. I didn't even know that this was going to be a part of the Affordable Health Care Act, and I would not have guessed how interesting the information would end up being, but it is completely mind-blowing. So we're going to talk about a couple of, this is in New York City, by the way, we're going to be spotlighting a couple of procedures and the insane, mind-blowing, and honestly, credit-breaking difference in these charges. So first, to be put on a ventilator, which this is insanely expensive even at the low end, but the lowest cost in the New York area that came out in this database was $53,000, which is a significant amount of money. The highest cost, $115,000, more than twice as expensive for the same procedure. Moving on to one of the common reactions to a heart attack. This involves, I think they said 4 stents and something else, but it's the same procedure. Bear that in mind when we talk about these numbers. $89,000 on the low end in the New York area, $166,000 on the high end. Again, about twice as expensive at the most expensive area. Another one, this is perhaps even the most shocking, the most mind-blowing information coming out of this database. In the New York area, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the treatment for that, the COPD, in the Bronx, there's a place that you can get it done for $7,000. So you might think, what, is it going to be about $14,000, $15,000 on the high end? No, at the Bayonne Hospital Center, $99,000 for the treatment for COPD. So $7,000, $99,000, literally just a few miles away. We've got this map here, by the way, showing the different metropolitan areas, showing the different boroughs, and 8,000, 15,000, 7,000, 100,000, just as you go down the blocks. And this information hadn't previously been available, or if it was available in some sense, it certainly wasn't publicly available in an easy-to-use format like this database coming out from the Affordable Health Care Act. So what should we do with this information, or why is this significant? We have a problem in America when it comes to healthcare costs. I think that you know that. We spend an insane amount on our healthcare costs, far more than other industrialized Western societies around the globe. Like the quality of our care in some cases is quite good, but it does not in any way justify the insane amount of money that we're spending on it. So that's sort of like the national picture. We have this problem we have to deal with, and thankfully this database might help us work on that in some way. But I want to talk about the human cost here. Now imagine that you suffer from a heart attack, as so many Americans will at some point in their life because of our diet and our exercise habits. It's just a fact of life. A lot of people are going to have heart attacks. What does it mean for an average American family that, depending on which hospital you go to, the same exact treatment could cost $90,000 or almost $170,000? That's at least $80,000 difference just for this one thing. And by the way, when you go to a hospital, you're not paying for one procedure. I have to assume that the other different auxiliary costs at the hospital are also probably more at one rather than the other. That's more than a Corvette extra for the same exact treatment for the health problem that you have. We have credit problems in this country. People are in debt. They're spending too much money. They're already having huge problems here. Can you imagine an extra $70,000 being thrown onto the backs of an average family? $170,000 for one medical procedure? How is that family ever supposed to recover from that? That debt is going to be with them for the rest of your life. Like, think about students like me that are paying our student loan debt. $30,000, $40,000, that takes 20 or 30 years to pay off. And you're telling me that $170,000 on a guy that might very well lose his job as a result of his inability to work if he's in some sort of physically strenuous activity is supposed to pay off that amount of money? Or even more sharply, let's talk about the COPD. $7,000, maybe you go in, you get that done. It's going to be difficult for your family, obviously. That's like a whole nother credit card to have to pay off, but you can probably do it. But if you make the mistake of being taking an ambulance to the wrong hospital, or if you don't know the different options in front of you, $99,000, it's just absurd. Like, it's going to take a long time for all of the information in this database to be compiled and for us to figure out what to do with it. And I assume that long term, that's why we're getting the information. But I wanted to talk about this because I want you to think about it. When you go to the hospital, if there's any way for you to compare costs, if you can look at this database in some way, do so. Because if it's a couple of $1,000s, a couple tens of thousands of dollars, that is going to be a massive difference for your life. And this is just another way that the Affordable Health Care Act, I think, is going to help out average Americans and average American families. And I hope that the Democrats and Obama specifically get the credit they deserve, at least for this provision of the Affordable Health Care Act. Okay, so that's the good news. Let's get on to some of the silly news. There will be a silver lining, so don't worry as I progress through this story. Michele Bachmann is back, and she's as crazy as ever. She was speaking at a Capitol Hill event to a group of Christians, and she had some interesting things to say about 9/11, Benghazi, and what the American public and the American government should do going forward. Let's take a look at this video from Right Wing Watch.
It's no secret that our nation may very well be experiencing the hand of judgment. It is no secret that we all are concerned that our nation may be in a time of decline. If that is in fact so, what is the answer? The answer is what we are doing here today. Humbling ourselves before an almighty God, crying out to an almighty God, saying, not of ourselves, but you. Would you save us, O God? We repent of our sins. We turn away from them. We seek you. We seek your ways. That's something that we're doing today, that we did on the National Day of Prayer. It's something that we have chosen to do as well on another landmark day later this year, on September 11th. Our nation has seen judgment not once but twice on September 11th. And that's why we are going to have 911 pray on that day. Is there anything better that we could do on that day rather than to humble ourselves and to pray to an almighty God?
Some of those quotes are it hurts my brain, like right in the front, right between my eyes, that she's saying this crazy stuff. Now, understand, She's not like a right-wing pundit or something. She is a government official. She's a congresswoman, and she has been for a number of years. Maybe I'm silly at this point to expect any sort of responsibility from her, but she comes out with these crazy quotes about praying, and obviously she's in support of this September 11th National Day of Prayer and Fasting. I get that. She wants to promote it a couple of months out. But we had the Benghazi situation in which 4 people died. Thousands died on 9/11. Now, she seems to be drawing some sort of, like, oh, 9/11 happened, and then there was the Benghazi event. God must be telling us something because these two things both happened on 9/11. Maybe the Benghazi attack happened on 9/11 specifically because 9/11 happened on 9/11, and it's not just some sort of cosmic divine coincidence or some way for God to tell us that he's pissed off at us. So she thinks that what better could we do than to be humble before God and hope that he'll save us from these terrible terror attacks that have been happening to us. I hope that this isn't an offensive statement, but how far removed? She's about one pantsuit removed from crouching on a beach somewhere on some Pacific island and worshiping coconuts and hoping that God will stop the storm from billowing down on her island. Like, we've moved past this in the last few tens of thousands of years. She's a government official. There are a lot of things the American government can do, and to a lesser extent the American public can do, to stop these situations from becoming so common, and maybe even happening at all. And it has nothing to do with being humble before God. We're being attacked for specific reasons. I don't know all of them, but I know that in many cases they have to do with what our government does abroad in regard to these Muslim nations. We're getting blowback. Like, that's a term that has become more common, and I understand that it's dangerous to talk about that because nobody wants to think that we have any responsibility for the attacks that are happening against us. But we can do something to make our situation better. We can stop drone striking civilians in Pakistan, Oman, and countries like that. We can stop sending troops abroad to Afghanistan and Iraq and killing civilians there. Like, God isn't going to, like, wave his hand over some 15-year-old boy in Pakistan and tell him, don't become a terrorist. But perhaps if we stop killing people who are not in any way involved in acts of terror, we can stop their relatives from growing up and becoming terrorists themselves. Now, maybe this isn't going to save us next week. Maybe we'll still have a couple more terror attacks in the short run. But in the long run, I think that will do far more to assure the safety of Americans than just bowing down before your sky god. She has one quote. Let's forget the quotes. You get the idea. She's crazy. But let's bear in mind that she is a politician, not a priest. Like, there are not that many people who have nearly as much political power in this country as Michele Bachmann does. Now, she's a congresswoman. I get that. They are not the president. They can't single-handedly make much happen. But she does have a vote on bills. She can sponsor bills. She can speak out in support of bills. But she believes that what she needs to be doing is praying and perhaps fasting, as if the contents of her stomach should be more important to the American public and the American government than the context of her skull. Unfortunately, we're finding out more and more about what the contents of her skull are, and they're not very impressive. So Michele Bachmann, who, by the way, very well might have been the Republican nominee for president this last time around, showing once again that she is in no way intellectually capable or qualified to hold office in this country. They can pray all they want. If it makes people feel better, fine, do it. There is some, it can de-stress you, I suppose. It makes you feel connected to the religious community you're a part of. I'm not downing on all of that. But the idea that prayer alone, or prayer more than other things, will assure the safety of Americans is ridiculous. That is going to be a reoccurring theme on this show. This is just the first of many times, I think. So moving on to another ridiculous Republican, actually in Minnesota, interestingly enough. So Minnesota is perhaps on the cusp of legalizing same-sex marriage. A bill passed the House just this last week. It's expected that the Senate will vote in support of it as well. And the governor has said that if it goes before him, he will sign it. So it looks at this point, barring any sort of weird legal or court shenanigans, that Minnesota will become, I believe, the 13th state in America to legalize same-sex marriage, which is a great thing. And there are so many people around that state who have to be so happy that after all of the work they've done to lobby their politicians in Minnesota, all of the work might pay off same-sex marriage might be legalized. And so there are people that are probably literally crying tears of happiness right now. They're not the only people crying, though. Representative Peggy Scott is also crying, but for an entirely different reason. Let's hear her words. This is in an interview with the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Peggy Scott says, "My heart breaks for Minnesota. It's a divisive issue that divides our state. It's not what we needed to be doing at this time. We want to come together for the state of Minnesota. We don't want to divide it." And they note in that interview that she was dashing tears from her eyes that gay people are going to be allowed to marry. So she doesn't want to divide Minnesota unless you're a gay couple, and then there's nothing she wants more than to divide you. We want to unite people unless you have similarly shaped genitalia. There's always going to be people like this. Like, we finally, progress takes so long, and we fight for years to get these social issues on our side. And finally, it seems like it's spreading, and numerous states over the last year have been legalizing same-sex marriage. We are going to be victorious in the long run. I think that you know this is one of the issues that we are going to win on. It might take time, but we're going to win on it. There's always going to be these sad sacks that are just crying about their traditions. She's going to be fine. I don't even know if she's married, but if she's married, she can stay with her husband. You know, they'll have a perfectly fine and happy marriage. The only thing that'll change is that now a couple of gay couples might also be able to be together. I want to spotlight one other politician. This is House Speaker Dennis Thyssen. He said what any politician in this situation should say when rights are extended to a group that has been marginalized by society historically. He said, "All Minnesotans deserve the freedom to marry the person they love, and we are proud to take this historic vote to ensure same-sex couples have that right." That's what every politician should be saying in Minnesota right now. This is a great day for Minnesota, a great day for America. If this is the 13th, I hope we have, 37 more of these in the next couple of years. I will actually be holding my breath. And for Peggy Scott, I don't know what to say to you. Move on, catch up. This is the modern day. Join us. We'd love to have you. I'm going to take one more quick break. When we come back, we have our last two stories. They're going to be nothing but fun. I'm going to answer some Twitter comments and then talk about the Maxim Top 100. Back in just a minute. Okay, back on the last block of the show, we got two more stories I want to talk about. First, I'm going to respond to some of your Twitter comments. Eventually, I'm going to talk about this Maxim Hot 100. Not exactly news, but I love these pictures, and there's a bit of controversy in the top 10 that we're going to get to. But first, let's get a little bit of community interaction going on here. So every week, I get great tweets from my followers. I love hearing from you guys. I didn't know what Twitter was going to do when it first came out. I didn't know what the point of it was since we already had Facebook and so many other social media sites. But I love how easy it is to communicate back and forth with all sorts of people. So I get messages from my fans. I'm sending messages to celebrities I'm a fan of. Everybody has fun. And over the last week, there's been some great comments from many of you. I want to respond to some of them. So the first comes from Sam Blank. He says, "Where do you get your amazing novelty t-shirts from? Some of the ones you wear on TYT are ace." He's talking about the shirts I think that I wear on TYTU. I don't often wear t-shirts on the main show unless they tell me, "Oh, you're hosting tonight," when I'm already in and wearing the t-shirt. I don't know if you guys know that happens, but I don't wear t-shirts on the main show on purpose. I just don't have a choice. But anyway, those t-shirts almost all come from shirt.woot.com. It's one of the Woot sites, so it sells one t-shirt every single day and only for one day. And so I watch pretty much every day and hope to get a t-shirt that I'll like. At this point, I think that it's only fair that shirt.woot sponsor me in some way because I feel like I do so much free advertising for them. But so far, no money, unfortunately. Al Belso, one of the guys that I tweet back and forth with probably more than anyone else, says, "Is this the project which you mentioned concerning working on the weekend? If so, kudos to you for taking advantage of the studio." Yes, I tweet about secret projects I'm working on all the time, but last week I did tweet about this one. I am here on the weekend filming because there's literally no time during the week to do it. Either other shows are filming, which is constantly happening. The studio is almost never being used, or more likely I'm just busy doing other stuff. And so For the time being, at least, if I'm doing this show, you can understand that I'm coming in and doing it on the weekend, like making the graphics and producing the stories and everything. So yeah, that's the one. And it's happening again, so hurrah! The third tweet I want to talk about is coming from Miles. He says, are you going to have similar stories to the main The Young Turks, or different stories for your personal channel? That's actually a really good question. So I can answer for what the plan is right now, but understand that it's entirely subject to change. So as it stands right now, because of limited time, most likely the stories I do are going to be ones that we've already planned to do on the Friday edition of the first hour of The Young Turks. That way I've already read the story, we've already made some graphics and things like that. I still need to make, like, the sidebars that you see. I have to make them because we wouldn't use them on Fridays. But I expect that that will be the way it is. Assuming that the show goes forward, I will probably be supplementing with interesting stories that I'm into. There are definitely subjects that I like way more than Jank or Ben or Michael, and so I'll suggest stories and they'll get shot down. So this is a good place to talk about those. And because of that, I'll be doing mostly political stories, since they're stories that were made for the first hour. I do also want to do some of the lighter stories, more second hour type stories. Stuff that doesn't really fit in the first hour but doesn't fit in tytu. I want to have a place to talk about those. It'll probably end up being this place. Finally, is a quote from Lucas, who works at the Young Turks. We were talking about the drone warfare, the expansion of Chinese drones, by the way. Didn't get to that last week, but it was an interesting story. He says, the more time goes by, the more the future feels like it's going to look like the Matrix, destroyed planet surveilled by killer robots. That actually sounds like that Tom Cruise movie that just came out. And it sounds awesome. I don't want the world to be destroyed, but if it did, robotic apocalypse, I mean, Terminator was pretty sweet, and there's always going to be that resistance, jumping over wrecked cars and stuff like that with laser guns that they made somehow. There are worse ways for the world to end. Anyway, so those are the tweets that I wanted to spotlight this week. If you want to see yourself on a future edition of the Weekly Roundup, just tweet me, and hopefully I'll remember them. I love talking to you guys, and when you say something interesting, I want to give you credit on the show. So that's it for this week. Last story of the day, we're going to move on to something entirely silly, but it does have its place on the show. Let's organize my little graphics here because I want to know who I'm looking at. So Maxim's 2013 Hot 100 has come out, and as always, it is complete and utter bullshit. What the fuck are they thinking? I honestly don't understand how they choose, especially the top 10. Look, I understand, before we get into the specific grievances I have, it's impossible to please everyone with these lists, and of course, the lists mean nothing. This is like a first world objection at best. But they choose some really ridiculous things, and I want to talk about it. So, first of all, before we get to the top 10, I want to talk about some of the higher up numbers that I had a problem with. So, 84 was Alice Eve, who, I'm not generally all about blondes, but of the blondes, she is by far one of the most beautiful. What is she doing in the 80s? That is a gorgeous British woman. And to juxtapose at number 83, one spot better than her, is Kat Dennings. Kat Dennings is beautiful, but come on, putting her up against Alice Eve, these little pairings here show how ridiculous lists like this tend to be. 65, Emilia Clarke, Daenerys Targaryen, Mrs. Stormborn herself, Mother of Dragons, is not even in the top 50. Does anyone at Maxim even watch Game of Thrones? Have you seen her speak High Valyrian? This is an injustice that I hope will be fixed in future editions of the Hot 100. Moving up to number 39, Lea Michele. She's one of my personal favorites. I am a Glee watcher, at least every once in a while. She's extremely talented, extremely beautiful, and she doesn't look like every other actress out there. Number 39, though, on talent alone, she should be in the top 20, so I personally find that to be an insult. Finally, moving up to 19, Emma Watson. If you've watched me on TYTU, you understand that I have a deep and abiding crush for Mrs. Emma Watson. Look, 19 is perfectly fine, and so I guess I shouldn't be mad about it, but when you find out who's in the top 10, her absence there it should bother you as much as it bothers me. Number 18, Ariane Celeste. I love that you can get in the top 20 of the Hot 100 even if you beat the shit out of your boyfriend like Ariane Celeste did. Maybe for some of the judges that actually made her hotter because she apparently is a bit feisty. I personally prefer my women in the non-domestic abuse category, but whatever. So those are outside of the top 10, the ones that I had a problem with. The top 10 is pretty interesting. Now, above the top 10, I think they don't even really worry about the list. Just put people wherever you want. Make sure that you have the big actresses, the big singers and things like that. But the top 10, they have to put more attention into. So at number 10, we have Alicia Cuthbert. She's perfectly lovely. I remember her from Old School. I don't know tons of other things that she's been involved in, but she's beautiful. No big problem with that. Moving up to number 9, Vanessa Hudgens. Damn. I don't entirely know what Vanessa Hudgens is famous for. I think it's something Disney related. I think that she probably dated some teeny boppers or something like that, and she's an actress. But yeah, that's top 10 material right there. No problem with that. Number 8, Kate Upton. Have to say, I assume that considering the last year or so, she would be higher up. I mean, her Cat Daddy video, come on. But no, nothing wrong with number 8. And she's not everybody's cup of tea. Some people think that her body isn't good or whatever. I think that the internet has warped our brains if you can look at her and think that she's not beautiful. But let's skip up to number 6. Jennifer Love Hewitt. She has been in the top 100, I think the top 10 for the last 150 years or so. She is getting apparently more beautiful with every passing year. If you've seen some of the posters around Hollywood for her show, The Client List, she's just getting hotter and hotter with every passing year, from Party of 5 on till the present. So I love that she can still make it in the top 10. Number 5, Jennifer Lawrence, who, I forget what the list was that came out earlier this year, but there was another big list where she was actually number 1. Here she's number 5. I don't really have a problem with it. Jennifer Lawrence seems very genuine, very funny. She's different than the average actress. She doesn't seem to take herself so seriously. So it's great that she's included on here. I think that she's beautiful in the girl next door sort of way. I don't know about top 5 hottest women in the entire world. But there she is. Number 4, Mila Kunis. She is no stranger to top 10 lists, even top 5 lists. So I like that she's there. I feel like you almost just have to put her there because so many guys have a massive crush on her because she seems so cool and awesome. And again, like the other ones I've talked about, doesn't look like every other actress. But it's actually the top 3 that I want to talk about because I don't understand what's going through Maxim's head. Number 3 is Rihanna. Now look, you can see her. She's beautiful. But 3rd most attractive woman in the country. And look, maybe I'm just being influenced by the whole Chris Brown thing, but it doesn't scream hot to me. I'm not a fan of her music, really. So I don't really understand why she's put there. Although, again, I understand there's some public opinion polls that go into this. Number 2, Selena Gomez. Again, like with Vanessa Hudgens, not entirely sure what she's famous for. I think she's been involved in some Disney stuff or something like that, and I think that she dated Justin Bieber, which for me actually would put her outside of the entire top 100, I think. But she is beautiful. The problem I have with her being number 2 is she does look like she's about 14 years old. Not sure that Maxim should be pushing this sort of thing out there. Look, I understand she is actually legal, but it's dangerous territory when you're idolizing someone who looks so young, and in her roles, by the way, is portrayed as very youthful. But whatever, all those are fine, and I'm not saying they shouldn't be on the list. I'm just airing my particular grievances. But number 1 is where I have a big problem. Miley Cyrus? Number 1 most attractive woman in the entire world? Miley Cyrus has a great body. She seems to keep herself very much in shape. The hair choices can be interesting, I suppose. I like that she doesn't feel scared to experiment, but number 1 in the world? It's got to be some sort of political thing. I don't know exactly who this is done for. I don't know if there's any money being involved here, if her record label or whatever is involved, or if her agent made some calls. Apparently, if you believe what they're saying, they did polling and she was by far the most popular. She's got a big Twitter presence. Maybe she organized her followers to vote for her. Look, I don't know who I would put there. Maybe Lea Michele. I think that she's pretty beautiful. I think that she deserves it. But Miley Cyrus, look, I got nothing against her. She's beautiful, and she wouldn't give me the time of day. I'm being totally realistic about that. None of these 100 women would. But number 1, I think these lists are made to just start controversy and produce videos like this, by the way. But in this case, I think it's ridiculous. Anyway, let me know who you think should be in the top 10. These lists are always fun to talk about. Obviously, it's not exactly world-breaking news, but it is fun, so let's get a little dialogue going. So that is it for episode 2 of the show, my little solo thing going forward. It's been fun to practice. It's different. I hope that you guys understand that despite the fact that I do TYTU every week, I have a co-host on that. And despite the fact that I do both the first hour and the second hour at least once a week on the main show, it's a very different thing doing a show solo. It's much more difficult. I would have had no idea how hard it is. And honestly, I'm not looking for sympathy for myself. Cenk Uygur is even more talented than people think because he can sit down and has done hundreds, if not thousands, of 2 to 3 hour shows entirely by himself historically. And that is just a monumentous task to do. Like, it takes a lot of preparation, a lot of time, the ability to organize your thoughts on the fly. That's why I'm doing this. I want to become better at it. I like these stories. I like talking to you guys about these stories, but it is hard. So I appreciate you bearing with me during these episodes of sort of growing pains. Anyway, as always, if you have suggestions for stories, feel free to tweet them at me, preferably in the Thursday or Friday range, because if you do it any earlier, they'll probably be old news by the time I get around to filming them on Saturday. If you have tweets you'd like to see talked about in the show, feel free to tweet me anything that's on your mind. And yeah, subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you next week on another episode of the show.